Every single Republican, House and Senate, every single one, every Republican in the House, every Republican in the Senate, they voted against it. Every one. Look, hear this, America. Every single Republican voted against lowering prescription drug costs. Every one. Every one. Against lowering health care costs. Every one. Against tackling the climate crisis. Every one. Against lower energy costs. Against creating good-paying jobs. Against a fair tax system. Every single one. Now every single American needs to return the favor and vote them out of office. Look, and $50 billion. You know how much this year, not counting the Medicaid changes? $1.7 trillion. So I don't want to hear it from Republicans about fiscal responsibility. I don't want to hear it. I mean it. I don't want to get going here. Republican, not a single one, House or Senate, voted for that legislation. We also passed once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's roads, highways, bridges, railroads, ports, airports, water systems, high-speed internet. We got a little help from Republicans, but not a lot, but enough to get it passed. But the truth is, there are a lot more Republicans taking credit for that bill than we actually voted for it. I see them out there, and now we're going to build this new bridge here. We're all for it. And by the way, this new road, and we're going to have an internet that's going to be all the way. I love them, man. They ain't got no shame. They don't have any shame.
First of all, good on Biden for calling these Republicans out. Republicans know that because they exist in a closed-loop ecosystem, they can tell whatever lies or distortions they want without having to worry about being called out. And so even though nearly all of them voted against the infrastructure package, they're still more than happy to take credit for its passage. For example, how Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez praised an ecosystem restoration plan thanks to infrastructure funding, saying, quote, "For many folks in the area, this project revives the area's storied past and deep roots." That was, of course, after he voted against that very measure, saying that the bill, quote, "will only lead to more spending for the Democrats and this flailing administration, and that the Democrats' path to trillions more in spending will only make matters worse and hold our country back." On his hypocrisy, his own office said, quote, "While Congressman Gonzalez did not vote for this initial package due to the $1 trillion price tag associated with it, if the money is going to be spent, he is going to advocate that it goes to his district." Right, of course, that while he tried his hardest to block the funding, he's of course going to advocate that it be spent in his district, where he'll take credit for it while railing against the very people who actually made that funding a reality. Or Republican Steve Scalise, whose district benefited with flood protection projects despite Scalise also voting against the legislation. His office said, quote, "What he did not support is tying necessary infrastructure needs to unrelated Green New Deal policies Democrats put in their $1.2 trillion bill. Ah yes, the Green New Deal, which is quite literally non-existent. Or Republican Clay Higgins, whose district got funding for waterways despite his no vote. Higgins said, quote, "While I oppose this infrastructure bill in its totality based on unwavering principle, there are certainly elements within the bill that my office fully support." Ah yes, those unwavering principles, clearly at play here where the congressman is taking credit for the very thing he tried to prevent from happening. You'd be hard-pressed to find principles more unwavering. Or Republican Ashley Hinson, who tweeted, "We secured $829 million in federal funding to upgrade locks and dams along the upper Mississippi River. This is game-changing for Iowa's agriculture industry and our Mississippi River communities." Only she's using that "we" pretty generously, considering she voted against the legislation. Or when Republican Senator Pat Toomey took to Twitter to lament a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh, writing, "My staff has been in contact with local emergency personnel regarding the Forbes Avenue bridge collapse in Pittsburgh. We will continue closely monitoring the situation, wishing a speedy recovery to those who are injured." Although, I'd imagine the victims would have been more appreciative of his vote for infrastructure funding than his wishes for a speedy recovery. Unfortunately, the wishes were all that they got from him. Or Republican Nancy Mace, who tweeted, "Before I ever joined the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I've been a tireless advocate for the lower country's needs, and we need to win a majority in November to improve our failing infrastructure and to make the best investments in our future," which is certainly a lot of words for someone who literally voted against the infrastructure bill to quite literally make those infrastructure investments possible. And just to be clear, the infrastructure bill wasn't the first, nor will it be the last, where Republicans will take credit for something that they voted against. Here's Madison Cawthorn touting the American Rescue Plan, a bill that he voted against. Here's Marsha Blackburn Blackburn whining about inflation despite voting against every bill presented to cut costs so that Americans could get some relief. Here's Jim Jordan complaining about gas prices and baby formula despite voting against bills preventing price gouging at the pumps and funding for the baby formula shortage. Here's Blackburn again asking for prayers for Ukrainians who are contending with Putin's crimes against humanity right after voting against sending military aid to Ukraine. Here's Thomas Massie wailing that Biden's more concerned with Ukraine than the baby formula shortage. Massie literally voted against funding for baby formula. Time and time again, Republicans are proving that they know these are good policies, which is ostensibly why they're trying to take credit for them, while simultaneously trying to prevent them from happening in the first place because they would rather hurt Americans if that meant they could deprive Democrats of a perceived win. I mean, think about that for a second. These Democratic policies are so popular that Republicans are falling over themselves to tout those accomplishments themselves, but they also did everything they could to ensure that they never came to pass. So every time a Republican touted funding for waterways or bridges or roads or ecosystem restoration or flood prevention, those Republicans wanted those issues to persist. And only after Democrats secured funding, with help from only a few Republicans, did the rest of the party show up at the receiving line to accept the praise and congratulations. If these people were capable of shame, they'd have a hard time showing their faces in public. Ultimately, it comes down to this. Republicans don't want government to work, and so they try on a daily basis to break it. They create insurmountable hurdles and manufactured crises, like, for example, how they required the USPS to create a $72 billion fund to pay for the cost of its post-retirement healthcare costs 75 years into the future, a burden that applies to no other federal agency or even private corporation. But they wanted to create an illusion of a failing agency so that they could ultimately privatize it. The same with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They want those programs, which, by the way, we've all been paying into our entire lives, to be privatized. And so the same predatory healthcare system that's been screwing over patients in this country would be replicated to cover entitlement programs. Because when it comes to Republicans, a program shouldn't exist unless some CEO is making hundreds of millions of dollars offering some scant service to people at the highest margins possible. God forbid we actually help people in this country without first lining someone else's pockets. So look, Biden can shame these Republicans until the sun goes down. I can shame these Republicans until the sun goes down. But at the end of the day, even though they themselves admit that Democratic policies are good enough to claim credit for, Republicans will continue to oppose everything they can because their priority isn't fixing anything, it is breaking it. Before you go, couple things. First, if you want to support my work, the best way is to subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. And second, if you want to see and hear more from me, check out my website, briantylercohen.com. That way you can get links to my podcast, merchandise, ways to donate to voting rights organizations, and so much more. The thumbnail is also right here on the screen, so go check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.